Quarterback Matt Zollers, obviously a great start to Missouri's 25 recruiting class, but one commitment compared to, for example, 19 for Notre Dame so far. Let's put all those numbers in context coming up right now on Locked On Mizzou.
You are Locked On Mizzou, your daily podcast on the Missouri Tigers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hail, you true sons and daughters. I'm John Miller, your Mizzou mafioso and the central scrutinizer of Missouri Tigers football and basketball. Coming up on today's program, going to talk about the super conference models that have been bandied about. I'm not so sure that would be good for Missouri fans if that actually happens. Frankly, I would prefer what we're in right now to anything possible in the future. I'd rather just keep the current SEC model moving forward. I want to explain why later in the show. But you know what? Let's start talking more about Matt Zollers, of course, the quarterback from Pennsylvania, a four-star player according to all the services, though there's a pretty big gap in Zollers' commitment rankings based on if you're looking at rivals or On3. Well, On3 has been getting a lot of recruiting talent over the last couple years. They're almost like what The Athletic was doing a few years ago, just accumulating a lot of talent. We'll see if that business model works out for them in the long run, but I have to say, I think I would trust On3 and 24/7 in their rankings over rivals at this point. And On3 has him as the third best quarterback in the entire country, a top 30 player overall. So obviously just a fantastic way to start your recruiting cycle, without a doubt. Though it is Missouri's first player in the recruiting cycle, which is notable. You start looking around the country, and there are other teams that have significantly more commitments than that. If you go look at, well, I just knocked rivals a little bit, but hey, I'm going to pull up their team rankings anyway, just as a little bit of a guidepost here. And number one right now, the Notre Dame Fighting Irish, they have 19 commitments, though Notre Dame is quite the outlier there. 19-1, though, at first glance, that is a little bit concerning. But then you look a little bit further down the list and you realize, oh, wait, the Georgia Bulldogs, well, they have 6 commitments. Well, that's a lot more than one, but a lot fewer than 19. So that's making me less worried. I don't know about you. Well, then you look at Michigan and Ole Miss. Yes, the defending national champions, one of Missouri's competitors in what would have been a 12-team playoff last year. Of course, the Ole Miss Rebels. Well, those two teams have 3 commitments. Florida State and Texas, 2 other big-time programs, have 4 commitments at this point in the cycle. So here's the bottom line. Some of Missouri's biggest targets are absolutely very much in play, and it seems like Missouri is going big game hunting here in a way that they never have before in the past. And don't get me wrong, obviously Eli Drinkwitz has raised the floor and the ceiling for Missouri's recruiting in his time here. But really in this cycle, when you're talking about offensive lineman Michael Fasusi, for instance, a 5-star player out of the Dallas area, seems like he's really in play for the Tigers. Listen, Missouri's done well in Texas in the past, but that caliber of an offensive lineman, especially out of Dallas, as my friend Brian Smith, my friend and colleague Brian Smith has said on this podcast before about Fasusi, one thing you know, if you're playing in Dallas, that's about as high as it gets in college football, in high school football, the level of play there. So Fasusi, the real deal, not usually the type of guy that Missouri is in on. Well, helps when you get a heck of a 2023 season. And quite honestly, obviously, Missouri's NIL infrastructure is a really big deal as well. Gabe DeArmond over at PowerMizzou.com, speaking of rivals and their sister sites, well, Gabe says According to his reporting and his sources, Missouri's NIL offer was better than Georgia and Penn State. And Gabe says it was better. He didn't say it was twice as good or significantly better. He just says it was better. And really, if that makes sense, that doesn't mean that Missouri's going to outbid, obviously, every single school for the guys that they want. There's this idea out there, especially from Oklahoma Sooner fans, it would seem, that Missouri is just coming over the top with an NIL offer every single time. Well, realistically, I think we know that's not the case. But if that is the case, for Matt Zollers, it makes all the sense in the world. If Missouri outbid Georgia and Penn State here, that makes all the sense in the world. A position of need for Missouri is the quarterback position, and obviously the most important position for any program. Missouri looking to the future of this position and saying, we could use a little bit more depth here for sure, and especially a guy like Zollers who has all the athletic high upside in the world. A guy who, before his junior season, by the way, had only one scholarship offer, and it was for Old Dominion. But by the end of his junior season, Penn State had offered, Pitt had offered, Missouri came calling, Georgia came calling. As I said before, Alabama made a late charge after Zollers threw for nearly 3,000 yards, rushed for another 420 on the ground as well. I mentioned that he was a basketball player, also played baseball in the summer as well, so a multi-sport athlete that I think that athleticism really shows up in his scrambling ability on film. He's not just a straight runner. He's making guys miss, just improvising in the pocket in a way that a guy who's played multiple sports would, not necessarily just the QB robot, that type of deal. So I just think Zollers, again, with his relative inexperience, maybe compared to some elite type of quarterbacks that are putting absolutely every moment of their life and every waking hour and rep into being a quarterback. Well, Matt Zollers is going to eventually start pushing a little bit that way. He's not going to play baseball or basketball in college. Once he gets to Missouri, I think this kid just has incredible upside when you really look at his arm strength, the way he can throw the ball downfield without his feet even being set. You can see why all of these SEC schools, including Missouri, of course, got really, really interested once they saw him up close and personal. He's the type of guy that in the past, before all the proliferation of video in your pocket, essentially everybody has a camcorder in their pocket now, easily uploadable onto YouTube and Huddle and all these different sites. In the past, not only would Missouri have not gotten this kid out of the state of Pennsylvania, they may have even been barely aware of him. So this is just another great example of 2024, how just the modern world we're in, this digital world, the speed of it has really changed recruiting in so many ways. And again, Brian Smith, my colleague here at Locked On, our recruiting expert, he tweeted out, quote tweeted my podcast about Zollers saying, "Is Missouri a rising SEC power? I've never seen Mizzou knock off Penn State for a top Pennsylvania recruit." So if you don't believe me, believe Brian for sure. No question about that. He follows this recruiting world as close as anybody. And of course, for decades, it seemed like college football basically never changed until COVID came along, and then all of a sudden the last few years has seemingly been nothing but change in this sport. Well, I don't think that's going to stop really anytime soon. Conference realignment seemingly never stops, and with the SEC and the Big Ten in particular sort of leading the pack and really breaking away from the pack in terms of revenue, lots of talk of super conferences and all this stuff. Well, The Athletic actually recently had a super conference model that they put out, 10-team conferences. And you know what? Where Missouri ended up in this scenario, despite the reunion with Kansas in this scenario, Nebraska and other Big Eight foes, I got to say, I'd rather stay in the SEC under the current scenario that we're in. Maybe you'll disagree with me, but I want to lay that out here coming up in just a little bit. But first, did you know that even if you have a 401k for retirement, you can still have an IRA? Robinhood has the only IRA that gives you a 3% boost on every dollar you contribute when you subscribe to Robinhood Gold. But get this, now through April 30th, Robinhood is even boosting every single dollar you transfer in from other retirement accounts with a 3% match. That's right, no cap on the 3% match. Robinhood Gold gets you the most for your retirement thanks to their IRA with a 3% match. This offer is good through April 30th. Get started at robinhood.com/boost. Subscription fees apply. And now for some legal info. Claim as of Q1 2024 validated by Radius Global Market Research. Investing involves risk, including loss. Limitations apply to IRAs and 401ks. 3% match requires Robinhood Gold for 1 year from the date of first 3% match. Must keep Robinhood IRA for 5 years. The 3% matching on transfers is subject to specific terms and conditions. Robinhood IRA available to U.S. customers in good standing. Robinhood Financial LLC member SIPC is a registered broker-dealer. When you're working during the day, do you have ESPN or Fox Sports on during the background? Well, knock it off and make the switch to Locked On Sports today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel programmed for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all the screaming matches. And best of all, Locked On Sports today does not have Paul Pierce on it. You got to make the switch just for that alone. So streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. It's the Locked On Sports Today stream. And you know what? Speaking of today, let's talk about tomorrow. What tomorrow could bring here in college football? Well, The Athletic had an idea. Hey, what if we had a bunch of 10-team conferences, divisions, essentially? Well, here's one thing that I know. I know that Missouri is part of the Southeastern Conference. If there is someday some big conglomeration of super conferences, whatever it might be, whether that's 40 teams, 60 teams, who the heck eventually knows? But I know that Missouri's going to be a part of it. Missouri's not going to get left out. That's a guarantee at this point. Well, The Athletic didn't really leave anybody out in terms of the current major conferences, but Missouri, in my opinion, did get the short end of the stick in this made-up scenario here. And that is a true possibility that Missouri, hey, maybe they're not exactly the height of the college football pecking order. Hopefully we make that change this season and beyond. But right now, it's weird to me that The Athletic decided that, hey, we're going to keep the Pac-10. Again, this is 10-team divisions here. We're going to keep the sanctity of the Pac-10, the old Pac-10 conference. We're going to keep that intact despite the fact that it fell apart. We're also going to keep the sanctity of the ACC and the SEC and all that good stuff. But instead, no, the Big Eight, that never gets any precedent whatsoever. As you can see here with the frequent flyer division that has Missouri, Kansas State, Nebraska, Colorado, and Iowa State. So 6 of the old Big Eight teams would be in there. However, Oklahoma and Oklahoma State would be in the Southwest division with Texas A&M, Baylor, Tech, and various other squads. So in here, again, they call it the frequent flyer division because, well, this is a bit of a knockoff of the current Big 12 system. You've also got Utah, UCF, and BYU along with Northwestern in the conference. So a weird conglomeration of one SEC/old Big 8 school in Missouri. You've got some Pac-12 schools in there, one Big 10 school in there in Northwestern. Well, I guess Nebraska is a Big 10 school as well, /old Big 8. So again, while it would be fun to play Kansas again every year and Nebraska, I'll give you that. The rest of it, though, UCF and BYU and Northwestern and Utah, is that really getting the blood pumping? Because it's not really working for me, I got to be honest. I would rather play in the current SEC model than this, especially in a world where obviously Missouri can schedule non-conference ball games with Kansas and Kansas State and Nebraska. Frankly, if there is a super conference model, we sort of get rid of the lower divisional teams or whatever, that would be a plus. I would hope that some of those type of intra-division conference type matchups would be preserved and put back on the table. That would certainly be fun. But I'm not so sure that Missouri would be having as much fun in the frequent flyer division as they would be having in the SEC, though I suppose if one team from every division is guaranteed a playoff spot every year, well, as things stand today, Missouri's looking like maybe the cream of the crop there, along with Utah, of course. And, well, we'll see what Coach Prime can do in a few years. But certainly Missouri and Utah, as of now, would be the cream of the crop, along with Kansas State, a tier below that. We'll see what Kansas can do in the future. Obviously, the last 15 years or so has been pretty ugly. Lance Leopold seems to have that program going in a better direction. But, again, like I said, let's not build him a statue just yet for beating UNLV in a bowl game. To me, bottom line, 8 is the perfect number. It is, just in terms of conferences, divisions, whatever you want to call them. Of course, then you've got the perfect basketball tournament, in my opinion. 3 days, the conference tournaments, but it's going to have to be different or somebody's going to be upset for sure. We can't just have even numbers. If you're going to have tradition, if you're going to try to have tradition within this new model, I'm sorry, it's just not going to work. You got to almost have the Pac-10, the Big 8, the SEC might have 11 or 12, whatever it might be. It's never going to be a perfectly numbered thing if you're going to try to get back to a tradition. To me, that's the problem with this whole NFL model, is trying to be like the NFL. Knock it off. It's not going to be it's not going to have perfect parity. The NFL doesn't either through their schedules either. So I just think this whole attempt is maybe going a little bit too far for sure. One thing I've talked about quite a bit in the last week or so is the new kickoff rule in the NFL. And first of all, how I believe that's going to help Harrison Mevis, since kickoff distance is clearly not going to be as much of a thing anymore, maybe not a thing at all, quite honestly, when you think about it. If there's no incentive to kick the ball into the end zone, well, that changes the entire process on kickoff. So if you're Harrison Mevis and you're an excellent place kicker, this is good news, I would say. One thing I did not include on this, and by the way, I've been pretty positive on this kickoff rule so far. I'm allowed to change my mind when I see it in action this coming season. But as of right now, to me, I don't think it's the worst thing in the world that it looks more like a regular first through third down snap than just the, guys running into each other as fast as they possibly can. I'm okay with that. That's just me. One thing I don't love about this rule, though, is it does eliminate surprise onside kicks. That's for sure. And there's no way around that, really, as far as I can tell. In fact, the rule is now you have to, if you're trailing the game, this is the only time you can actually kick an onside kick under these new rules. You have to be trailing the game, and sort of like when you have to notify the ref that there's a offensive tackle that is going to be an eligible receiver. Well, before you even do the onside kick, you have to notify the ref, hey, we're doing an onside kick. Frankly, what exactly that's going to look like, I'm not even sure. Is that going to look like the old kickoff onside kick then? Not even totally sure on that one, I'll be honest with you. But regardless, the missing element of surprise onside kicks, that's kind of a bummer. And I will say, speaking of Harrison Mevis, the start of that Memphis game, somebody was offside for Missouri, but they did start with a surprise onside kick. Very well executed, not only the kick, but the recovery by Harrison Mevis. So there's something that may be taken out of his bag as well. So everything's a trade-off, right? But ultimately, I still am positive on the NFL's kickoff rule. Anything's better than 80% of the time the ball just being a touchback. But the lack of onside kicks, the surprise part of it especially, that is a loss for sure. And when it comes to the Jonte Porter situation, the NBA investigating, well, some strange activity involving prop bets and Jonte Porter. Still no accusations against Porter himself, but I will say a lot of the commentary I've seen around this situation, I still think misses the point. And a lot of the pro Pete Rose being in the Hall of Fame people, I think, miss a huge part of the point here as well, especially when it comes to betting on yourself. That's not an excuse to me. That's not a get out of jail free card whatsoever. So I want to explain why coming up here in just a little bit. But first, let's talk about Gametime, because I tell you, I've had some frustrating experiences not using Gametime before, buying last-minute tickets. I'll remember when my Royals were going in through their World Series run, I told somebody, hey, the Royals are actually good this year. We might want to buy some tickets before we get there. We waited, and well, it was very, very frustrating. That's never going to happen to you with Gametime, because right now you could be going down the highway right now to this afternoon St. Louis Cardinals baseball game today against the Marlins. You could just pull up Gametime right now. They've got all-in pricing, seat views with panoramic views of your seat in the app before you buy. Right now, Cardinals, Marlins, just $10 all in. That's the cheapest deal you're going to get. They also have flash deals, zone deals, all kinds of stuff. And here's the thing. The best part is you're going to take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off. Download the Gametime app. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. So just a quick recap on the Jonte thing for the uninitiated. Basically, on a couple nights in the last 2 months here, the NBA season for the Toronto Raptors, there was really unusually high betting interest on unders for Jonte Porter. In other words, a couple bets, for example, it was, will Jonte Porter attempt a three-pointer or not, basically, over 0.5 three-pointers. Well, in both of these games with unusual betting activity, Jonte Porter left the game under fairly dubious, in retrospect, injury situations. It wasn't as though Jonte Porter landed on somebody's foot and obviously twisted his ankle. No, he left the game with an eye injury. And again, maybe his eye really did hurt. That's certainly possible. On the other hand, little dubious, again, with all this information. I don't know what happened here. No accusations have actually been thrown at Jonte Porter. All we know is there's some suspicious activity around his betting. Well, here's what Sam Snelling over at Rock M Nation had to say, and I think this is certainly a sentiment that I've seen a lot, not only around this situation, but around players betting on sports in general. And he says, on Jonte Porter, maybe he's guilty. And if that's the case, it's a horrible look. He's thrown away his NBA career, a pretty lucrative career, to profit off his own play by tanking. When it comes to betting on yourself, that's the worst way to do it. At least if you're betting on the overs, you're trying to win, right? Betting under means you're doing much less than you can do. And certainly I understand this initial thought and this instinct for sure, but I also believe that this thought is where the Pete Rose crowd, I'll call them, the people who want Pete Rose to be reinstated, put back into the Hall of Fame, because he never bet against the Cincinnati Reds, his team. Well, I think this is where they're led astray, because to me, as far as I can tell, there really shouldn't be a huge distinction between overs and unders, between tanking your numbers down or trying to push them up, especially in a very team-oriented sport like basketball, where, yes, if Jonte Porter is taking or not taking a three-pointer based on his own individual needs and financial incentives over the needs of the team, well, obviously that's a huge problem. Then he's not then his needs are not aligned with the team. He's not trying to help the team win then. He's trying to help himself quite directly, not just in terms of, oh, I want to play well and I want to get more points to get a contract in the future. No, a literal statistical bet. Either way, you can see how this would affect the game. Because think about it, even in a more individual sport like baseball, where in theory, hey, if I'm betting on myself to get hits, right? Well, then what's the problem in theory? That's the Pete Rose theory. Well, if I'm betting on myself to do well, if I'm betting on my team to win, then what's the problem? But as you can see, if you're betting on overs for base hits or something like that, and it's the 9th inning, and I need one more base hit for my over to hit on myself, well, there might be nobody out with a runner on second, and the manager might want me to move that runner over, maybe by bunting or just by grounding out to second base, hopefully. If I can't square the ball up and hit it out of the park, at least move the runner over to second base. That's real fundamental baseball, especially tie game, no outs, 9th inning, runner on second, that type of deal. But as you can see here, now I, as the guy who's bet on myself, has an incentive to not ground it out to second and move the runner over. Yes, that may be what's best for the team to set up Shohei Ohtani, ironically enough, who's behind me, whatever great superstar hitter is behind me. Maybe that's what's best. I move the runner over to third so he can have one out, drive him in, that kind of deal. Again, all of this affects the team. And if Pete Rose is going to bet on a game in the regular season, well, his job as manager is not just to win that individual game, of course. It's to manage the team for the entire 162-game regular season, spring training, the playoffs, and all of that stuff. So if he has an incentive to personally win game number 100 more than game 101, 102, 103, 104, any of the other games of the season, that's a problem, because that means he could use his bullpen differently than he otherwise would have. Maybe he brings his closer in to a 3 or 4 run ball game to make sure he secures his bet, that type of deal. And maybe that costs his team down the road when his bullpen is worn out, or maybe he leaves that starter in, an extra hitter, an extra inning, whatever it might be. Again, it's not a get out of jail free card just because you're trying to win that particular game or score as many points as possible, because obviously if you're doing that, it affects the rest of the team as well. Even in something like tennis, for example, which is it's absolutely an individual sport. If you're going to bet yourself on props, okay, I'm going to hit 25 aces or more. If you hit the over, you're going to be going for aces more instead of trying to get that second serve in and just win the match. So again, it just throws all of the integrity into question of the sport. And once you do that, now your fans could potentially start going away. That's why this is a big deal. And to me, the idea of, well, at least he was betting on himself, that doesn't work for me. And hopefully I've explained exactly why. So that doesn't get Pete Rose or anybody else off the hook, in my humble opinion. But as always, if you have a different take, hit me up on x.com, anywhere else on social media, at Locked On Mizzou, lockedonmizzou@gmail.com. So until next time, I am John Miller, and thanks as always for listening to Locked On Mizzou.